The alarm on the training deck screamed before I even opened my eyes, and I knew this day was going to be different. I am Nora Bell, and 3 months ago, I was the only human standing in a room full of aliens who did not think I belonged there. That morning, standing on the sparring platform with every eye in the academy locked on me, I finally understood why they called my planet a Deathworld. It was not an insult, it was a warning, and nobody in that room had bothered to read it. The lights above the training ring buzzed to life, casting a cold white glow across the metal floor. My hands were already shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of holding myself still. Across from me stood Threxis Van, arms crossed over his armored chest plates, a smile stretched across a face that had never once needed to worry about dying young. "Finally," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "the Deathworld girl steps up. Let us see if the stories about your fragile little planet are true." I did not answer him. Words were not going to win this. I had learned that lesson long before I ever left Earth. 3 weeks earlier, I had walked through the doors of the Interstellar Coalition Training Academy for the first time, carrying nothing but a single bag and the address of my old life, wrapped up in a memory I was not ready to let go of. The academy sat on a floating platform above a gas giant, its halls built from smooth silver metal that looked like it had never known a single mistake. Every species I had only read about in briefing files walked past me in real life. Tall reptilian officers from Krios, floating council members from Ethal, their bodies made of shifting light, and the Calderians, armored and proud, walking like the galaxy already belonged to them. I was the strange one, the soft one, the one everyone stared at like I might break if the wind blew too hard. "You are from Earth," said the registration officer, glancing at her screen with something between curiosity and pity. "Deathworld classification, extreme hazard environment, high mortality rate. Are you certain you want to continue with combat training, Cadet Bell? There are safer academic tracks available." "I am certain," I said. She nodded slowly, the way people do when they think you have made a mistake, but they are too polite to say it out loud. That first week, I learned quickly that humans were seen as a charity case. The Coalition had only opened membership to Earth 2 years earlier, after decades of quiet observation. Most of the instructors treated me kindly enough, but with the careful gentleness people use around something breakable. My classmates were not always so careful. Threxis Van sat 2 rows behind me in my first tactics class, and within the first hour, he had already decided exactly what he thought of me. "Careful with that one," he said to the Calderian cadet beside him, just loud enough for me to hear. "I heard their bones snap if you look at them wrong." A few of the others laughed. I kept my eyes forward and said nothing. It became a pattern after that. Every training session, every simulation, every moment where I was given a task, Threxis found a way to make a comment. He corrected my stance during hand-to-hand drills, even when my form was fine. He mocked my reaction times on the obstacle course, even though I finished every run. He told anyone who would listen that humans were only accepted into the Coalition because the Council felt sorry for a species too weak to matter. I did not fight back with words. Not because I could not, but because every single day of my life before this academy had taught me something Threxis Van had never needed to learn. Save your energy. Do not waste it proving a point to someone who is not worth the cost. Wait, watch, survive. On Earth, that lesson started before I could even read. I grew up in a small mountain town where the winters buried the roads in snow for months at a time, where predators still moved through the forests at the edges of the fields, where storms could flatten a house in an hour, and where the smallest mistake in the wrong season could cost you everything. My grandmother used to say that Earth did not raise children, it tested them, and only the ones who listened carefully enough got to grow up. By the time I was 6 years old, I knew how to start a fire in wet conditions. By 10, I knew how to read a changing sky and get my little brother inside before the storm hit. By 15, I had survived 2 years working alongside my father on rescue teams pulling people out of flooded valleys after the rains came harder than anyone predicted. None of that made me proud. It just made me careful. The Coalition's own files, the ones I read during my very first night in the Academy dormitory, called Earth an extreme hazard environment, unsuitable for standard biological development. The report listed predators, disease, violent weather, unstable geology, and a long history of conflict between our own people. It called it a wonder that intelligent life had survived there at all, let alone built anything resembling civilization. Reading that report should have made me feel small. Instead, for the first time since arriving at the academy, I almost laughed. They had no idea. To them, Deathworld meant weak, damaged, a place life clung to by accident. They had never had to actually live there. During my second week, the academy ran a full physical baseline scan on every new cadet, checking bone density, muscle recovery speed, pain response, and healing rate. I remember the medical officer, a soft-spoken woman named Priya Nolan, running the scan twice because she did not believe the first result. "Your bone density is nearly double the average for your body mass," she said, frowning at her screen. "Your healing rate after minor tissue damage is faster than almost every species we have on file except the Cryosians, and they evolved specifically for regeneration. This has to be an equipment error." "It is not an error," I said quietly. She looked at me for a long moment, then wrote something down, and moved on to the next test without another word. I do not think she believed me. Not yet. Nobody else in the academy paid attention to that data. It sat quietly in a file somewhere, ignored, the same way everyone ignored what Earth's own history had already proven 1,000 times over. Humans did not survive because we were strong in any one way. We survived because we refused to stop trying, no matter how much the world tried to convince us to give up. Threxus Van came from Caldera, a high-gravity world with thick natural armor plating across the skin and centuries of military tradition behind every cadet who trained there. His people were proud, and not without reason. Calderians were strong, fast, and difficult to injure. But strength that has never truly been tested breeds a very particular kind of confidence, the kind that does not know its own limits because it has never needed to find them. "You should not even be here," he told me one afternoon, after I finished a combat simulation he thought I would fail. "This academy exists to train the future defenders of the Coalition, not to babysit a species that cannot even survive its own planet without losing half its population to storms and disease." A few cadets nearby went quiet, waiting to see if I would respond. I simply picked up my gear and walked past him toward the locker room. "Nothing to say, Deathworld girl?" he called after me. "Or is silence the only defense your fragile little planet ever taught you?" I stopped walking, just for a second, long enough to breathe, long enough to remember every single time silence had kept me alive back home, and then I kept walking, because he was not worth the breath it would take to answer him. That should have been the end of it. It was not. 2 days later, during our open combat elective, the instructor announced that any cadet could request a sparring match with another student, provided both agreed to participate. It was meant to be a simple way for us to practice technique in front of the class, nothing more than a training exercise. Threxus stood up almost before the instructor finished speaking. "I request a match," he said, his eyes finding mine across the room, "with the Deathworld girl." The room went quiet, in that particular way that happens right before something everyone expects to enjoy. A few cadets exchanged glances. Someone near the back muttered something about betting credits. Nobody looked surprised. Everyone had been waiting for this moment since the day I arrived, whether they admitted it or not. The instructor, a broad-shouldered Cryosian officer named Callum Reed, looked toward me with something close to concern. "Cadet Bell, you are not required to accept this request," he said. "Sparring matches are voluntary." I looked at Threxus. He was smiling that same smile he always wore, the one that said he had already decided how this would end before it even began. He genuinely believed he was about to teach me a lesson. I thought about my grandmother, standing on our porch during the worst storm I had ever seen, calmly tying down the shutters while half the town panicked. I thought about my father, pulling a stranger out of floodwater with nothing but rope and stubborn refusal to let go. I thought about every single person who had ever underestimated what it took to simply survive being human. "I accept," I said. The room erupted into quiet excitement, cadets shifting in their seats, whispering predictions, most of them certain about how this would go. Threxus stepped down onto the training platform first, rolling his shoulders, clearly enjoying the attention. I walked down after him, feeling the cold metal floor beneath my boots, feeling every eye in the room settle on me at once. Instructor Reed moved to the edge of the platform, his expression unreadable. "This is a controlled exercise," he said, addressing both of us. First one to yield or fail to continue loses the match. Understood? Understood, Threxus said, his voice full of confidence. Understood, I said, my voice steady and quiet. The instructor stepped back. The lights above the ring shifted to a brighter, sharper white, marking the start of the match. Threxus dropped into a wide fighting stance, one that made full use of his height, his reach, and the thick natural armor covering his arms and shoulders. I did not move into a stance at all. I simply stood, relaxed, watching him the way I had once watched storm clouds building over the mountains, reading the shape of what was coming before it ever arrived. Last chance to yield before this gets embarrassing, Threxus said, grinning. I said nothing. He came at me fast, faster than I expected from someone his size, closing the distance in a single powerful step, his arm sweeping toward me in a strike clearly meant to end the match before it truly began. I did not step back. I let it come. His arm connected with my shoulder, and the impact rocked through my whole body, a burst of pain sharp enough to make the room tilt for half a second. Somewhere behind me, I heard a few cadets gasp. I did not fall. I stepped back once, steady, and rolled my shoulder, testing the damage, the way I had tested 100 injuries before this one. It hurt. It was not enough. Threxus blinked, clearly expecting that single hit to end the match. When I remained standing, his confident grin faltered for just a moment before he covered it with a short laugh. Tougher than you look, he said, still will not be enough. He came at me again, this time with a series of quick strikes meant to overwhelm me before I could recover. I stepped sideways, letting most of them pass by inches from my body, absorbing only what I could not avoid. Each hit that landed sent a jolt of pain through me, but none of them slowed me down the way he expected. I was not fighting him yet. I was reading him. Back home, before any real danger, before any storm or flood or long night stranded on a mountain trail, the first rule my father ever taught me was simple. Do not react. Watch first. Understand the shape of the threat before you decide how to respond to it. Panic gets people killed faster than the danger itself ever could. Threxus fought like someone who had never needed patience. Every strike came from confidence rather than calculation, powerful but predictable, following the same rhythm every Calderian cadet had used in every training video I had studied since arriving at the academy. Strong opening pressure, followed by a pause to gauge the opponent's reaction, followed by a finishing strike, aimed to end things quickly. He was already several strikes into pushing me back, driving me toward the edge of the platform, his confidence growing with every step I gave up. A few cadets in the crowd began cheering his name, sensing what they believed was the inevitable end of the match. Yield now, Threxus said, breathing harder than before, though still smiling, and I will make sure this ends quickly. I did not answer. I kept watching. The truth was, every step back I gave him was a choice, not a retreat. I was letting him believe he was winning ground, letting him grow more certain, more relaxed, more willing to commit fully to his next move, instead of holding something back in reserve. On Earth, we called that patience. In the wilderness, patience was not a virtue people admired. It was simply the difference between the people who came home and the people who did not. I thought about the first time I had faced something far more dangerous than Threxus Van. I was 12 years old, hiking with my father through a narrow mountain pass, when a storm rolled in faster than either of us had predicted. Within minutes, the temperature dropped hard enough to turn rain into ice, and the trail beneath our boots became a sheet of frozen stone. My father grabbed my arm and told me the same thing he always told me in moments like that. Do not fight the mountain. Understand it. Move with what it gives you, not against it. We survived that storm not because either of us was stronger than the weather, but because we understood exactly how much danger we were in, and we respected it enough to move carefully instead of recklessly. Fear did not save us that day. Awareness did. Threxus Van had never once faced a mountain that did not care whether he lived or died. He had trained in simulations, sparred against classmates who followed rules, competed in matches with clear boundaries and clear consequences. He had never needed to develop the kind of awareness that only comes from facing something that offers no mercy and expects no apology. He struck again, a heavy blow aimed toward my ribs, one clearly meant to end the exchange. I twisted just enough to let it slide past the most dangerous point of impact, catching only a glancing hit across my side, instead of the full force he intended. Pain flared through me, sharp and immediate, but I stayed on my feet, absorbing it the same way I had absorbed every bruise, every fall, every hard lesson life on earth had ever handed me. "Why will you not fall down?" Threxus muttered, more to himself than to me, frustration beginning to creep into his voice for the first time. I finally spoke, my voice quiet, but steady enough for the whole room to hear. Because falling down was never something I was allowed to do easily. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through the confidence he had worn since the moment he first saw me. It was small, barely noticeable, but I saw it. I had spent my entire life learning to read small signs before they became large problems. He pressed forward again, faster this time, driven more by frustration than strategy, and that shift was exactly what I had been waiting for. Anger makes people predictable in a very particular way. It removes patience. It removes calculation. It replaces careful movement with pure force. And pure force, without control behind it, always leaves an opening. I watched his weight shift as he prepared his next strike. Watched the small change in his stance that told me exactly where his balance would be in the next half second. My body reacted before my mind had even finished the thought, moving not out of fear, but out of years of training that had nothing to do with any academy, and everything to do with simply staying alive back home. I stepped inside his reach instead of away from it. The room went completely silent. For the first time since the match began, Threxus Van was the one caught off guard. His strike, aimed at where I had been standing only a moment earlier, swept through empty air. In the fraction of a second where his balance shifted forward, uncommitted and exposed, I moved. I did not think about winning. I did not think about proving anything to him, or to anyone else watching from the edges of that platform. I thought about the simple, practical truth my father had drilled into me since before I could walk. When an opening appears, you do not hesitate. Hesitation is how people who could have survived, instead did not. My hand found his arm, redirecting the momentum he had already built rather than fighting against it directly. It was not about strength. It was about understanding exactly how much force was already in motion and simply choosing the direction it would go next. Threxus Van, star pupil of the academy, proud son of a warrior world, felt his own weight betray him for the first time, in longer than he probably remembered. His feet left solid footing. The last thing I saw before instinct fully took over was the look on his face, somewhere between disbelief and the sudden, dawning realization that everything he had assumed about me might have been wrong from the very beginning. Then the sound of impact filled the room, sharp and undeniable, and Threxus Van hit the training platform floor. The silence that followed was different from any silence I had experienced since arriving at the academy. It was not the quiet of pity, or curiosity, or careful politeness. It was the silence of an entire room, recalculating everything it thought it understood. I stood over him, breathing hard, my shoulder throbbing where his first strike had landed, my side aching from the second. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired, and steady, and entirely present, in a way I had not felt since stepping off the transport ship that first brought me to this academy. Threxus lay on the floor for a long moment, staring up at the bright training lights above him, his chest rising and falling, as he tried to process exactly what had just happened. Instructor Reed stepped forward slowly, his expression unreadable, though something in his posture suggested he was doing his best not to look too surprised in front of the class. "Match complete," he said finally. "Cadet Van has yielded the floor." Nobody had heard Threxus actually say the word yield. Nobody needed to. The proof was lying flat on the ground in front of the entire room. I stepped back and offered my hand to help him up, the same way I would have offered it to anyone struggling to their feet after a fall, whether on a training platform or a mountain trail back home. For a moment, Threxus simply stared at my hand, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and something that looked almost like the beginning of respect. He did not take it, not yet. He pushed himself up on his own, slowly, testing his balance, before standing fully upright. When he finally looked at me, the arrogance that had defined every single interaction we had shared since my arrival was gone, replaced by something quieter, something I had not expected to see from him. He looked, for the first time, genuinely curious. How? He said, his voice lower than I had ever heard it. Did you do that? I thought about how to answer him honestly, without cruelty, without the satisfaction of turning his own mockery back against him the way part of me wanted to. I thought about every single lesson my planet had ever taught me, lessons written not in training manuals or simulation logs, but in storms survived, in floods endured, in long winters that tested every person who called that place home. I did not do anything special, I said quietly. I just never had the luxury of assuming I would win. Around us, the room remained silent, cadets from a dozen different worlds staring at both of us, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, I noticed Instructor Reed quietly making a note on his datapad, his expression thoughtful rather than surprised. I did not know it yet, standing there on that training platform with my shoulder aching and my breath still uneven. But that single moment was about to change everything the Academy believed about my planet, about my species, and about the quiet, careful strength that Deathworlds like Earth had spent thousands of years teaching their people, whether the rest of the galaxy chose to notice or not. Word of the match spread through the Academy faster than any official announcement ever could. By the time I reached the medical wing that evening to have my shoulder examined, 3 separate cadets from other classes had already stopped me in the hallway, asking if the stories were true, if I had really put Threx's van on the floor in front of the entire tactics class. I did not enjoy the attention. Back home, drawing attention to yourself during a crisis was rarely a good idea. It meant people were watching you, instead of watching for the next danger. Old habits do not disappear just because the danger changes shape. Dr. Priya Nolan examined my shoulder with careful, practiced hands, running a scanner across the bruised skin, while glancing occasionally at the readings on her display. This should be swollen twice this size, she said, more to herself than to me. The impact reading from the training platform sensors shows a strike well within range to cause a minor fracture. Your bone shows no damage at all, just soft tissue bruising, already beginning to heal. It happens, I said simply. She set the scanner down and looked at me directly, the same careful curiosity in her eyes that I remembered from my very first physical baseline weeks earlier. Cadet Bell, I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer, she said. When our sensors registered that hit landing on your shoulder, our system predicted a 30% chance of fracture, based on the force involved. That prediction is calibrated using data from a dozen different coalition species, with similar body mass to yours. Not one of them would have walked away from that hit, without at least some structural damage. Why are you different? I sat quietly for a moment, thinking about how to explain something that had never needed explaining before, not to anyone who grew up the way I had. On Earth, everyone I knew carried some version of this same resilience, because everyone I knew had needed it simply to reach adulthood. My planet does not go easy on anyone, I said finally. Where I grew up, a bad fall on ice could mean a broken leg with no way to get help for hours. A bad storm could mean losing power for a week in freezing temperatures. A wrong step near the wrong animal could end your life in seconds. Nobody teaches you to be tough there. Your body either adapts or it does not survive long enough to matter. Dr. Nolan was quiet for a long moment, absorbing what I had said the same way she absorbed data from her instruments, carefully and without immediate judgment. Your species evolved in an environment that killed the ones who could not adapt quickly enough, she said slowly, almost to herself. Generation after generation, only the most resilient survived to pass on their traits. That is not an anomaly in the data. That is evolutionary pressure operating exactly as it should, just under far harsher conditions than almost every other coalition world has ever experienced. I nodded. It felt strange hearing someone describe my entire planet's history in such clinical terms, but she was not wrong. Earth had never handed anyone an easy inheritance. Every advantage humans carried had been paid for, generation after generation, in hardship most of the galaxy would never understand. News of that conversation eventually made its way, in pieces, to the rest of the Academy staff. Within a few days, what had started as a private medical observation grew into something much larger. Instructor Reed requested a full review of every physical assessment ever conducted on a human cadet, comparing the results against the baseline expectations built from decades of coalition medical data. The findings, once compiled, quietly stunned several senior instructors. Human bone density, While not the strongest in the coalition on its own, combined with an unusually efficient healing rate and an extraordinarily high pain tolerance threshold, created a combination no other known species matched. Our reflexes were not the fastest, our raw strength was not the greatest, our senses were not the sharpest, but nearly every category showed the same pattern. Humans consistently performed in the upper range of acceptable tolerance across almost every category at once, rather than excelling dramatically in one area while falling short in others. It is not that humans are exceptional in any single measurable way, Dr. Nolan explained during a staff briefing I was not present for, though I heard about it afterward from Instructor Reed himself. It is that humans appear to have no true weaknesses left to exploit. Every gap that should exist has been closed by generations of survival pressure. Their planet did not simply fail to kill them, it refined them. That explanation began circulating quietly among cadets and instructors alike, shifting the way people spoke about Earth and about me. The word Deathworld, which had followed me since my very first day at the academy, like an insult wrapped in polite pity, began to take on a different weight entirely. It stopped sounding like a description of weakness and started sounding, slowly, like something closer to respect. Not everyone changed their opinion immediately. Some cadets still whispered behind my back, unwilling to let go of assumptions they had carried since childhood, about what it meant to come from a fragile, primitive world. Old ideas rarely disappear the moment new evidence arrives. They fade slowly, worn down over time, the same way a mountain trail eventually smooths beneath enough careful footsteps. Threx's van, however, changed almost immediately, though not in the way I expected. 3 days after the match, he approached me in the training hall, before our morning session, standing a respectful distance away, instead of looming over me the way he once had. I requested access to the full sensor data from our match, he said, without any of the mockery that usually colored his voice. I wanted to understand exactly what happened. I have reviewed it 11 times. And what did you find? I asked. You never once struck me with more force than necessary, he said. You absorbed every hit I landed without any visible sign of significant pain, and you waited, patiently, for a single moment of exposed weakness, before ending the exchange entirely. On Caldera, we are taught that strength wins battles. You did not use strength against me at all. You used patience and awareness, and you let my own aggression become the weapon that defeated me. I studied him for a moment, surprised by how carefully he had thought this through. This was not the same cadet who had spent weeks calling me fragile and weak in front of the entire class. On my planet, patience is not a soft skill, I said. It is often the only thing standing between a person and disaster. You cannot outmuscle a mountain. You cannot outrun a storm. You can only learn to understand them well enough to survive them, and that requires a kind of strength that has nothing to do with how hard you can hit something. Threxus was quiet for a long moment, turning that idea over the way I imagined he had turned over every strategic lesson he had ever learned since childhood. I underestimated you, he said finally, not because I did not see your strength, but because I did not understand what strength actually meant on a world like yours. I apologize, Cadet Bell. That mockery was unearned, and it was wrong. I had not expected an apology, not from him, not this soon. Back home, people rarely apologize so directly, so plainly, without excuses attached. There was something almost refreshing about hearing it stated so simply. Apology accepted, I said. But you should know something. I never needed you to respect me, to know what I was capable of. I already knew. I just did not need to prove it out loud. He nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes, a recognition settling into place that had nothing to do with pity or curiosity anymore. It looked, for the first time since I had met him, like genuine respect. Over the following days, that respect began spreading beyond just the two of us. Cadets who had once watched me with quiet pity now approached with quiet curiosity instead, asking careful questions about Earth, about the conditions we had survived, about the kind of childhood that produced someone capable of standing firm against a species built for war. Instructor Reed pulled me aside after one training session, his expression thoughtful. Cadet Bell, the Academy staff has requested a formal review of the human physical baseline data, he said. Your species may need an entirely new classification within our training protocols. What your planet's harsh environment has done to your biology is not a weakness the Coalition failed to notice. It is a strength the Coalition never understood how to measure. I thought about my grandmother, standing calmly through storms that terrified grown men twice her size. I thought about my father, hauling strangers out of floodwaters with nothing but rope and stubborn determination. I thought about every single person on Earth who had ever quietly endured something the rest of the galaxy would have called impossible, without ever once expecting recognition for simply staying alive. You are welcome to study it, I said. But you should know something else too. We never called it strength back home. We just called it Tuesday. Instructor Reed allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile, the first I had seen from him since arriving at the academy. Then perhaps, he said, the Coalition has a great deal to learn from an ordinary Tuesday on Earth. 2 weeks after that conversation, the Academy staff announced a full-scale emergency simulation, the kind every cadet dreaded and every instructor considered essential. Unlike our regular training sessions, this exercise would not follow a predictable structure. We would be placed inside a section of the training station designed to mimic a genuine system failure, complete with unpredictable variables, limited information, and real consequences if we made the wrong choices under pressure. This exercise exists to test more than your combat skills, Instructor Reed told the assembled class that morning, his voice carrying the same seriousness he reserved for lessons he considered genuinely important. It exists to test your judgment when the situation refuses to follow a plan. Many of you have trained your entire lives inside structured environments with clear rules. Today, there are no clear rules. There is only the problem in front of you, and the choices you make to solve it. I felt a familiar tightness settle into my chest. Not fear exactly, but the same quiet alertness I remembered from every unpredictable moment back home. Unlike the sparring match weeks earlier, this was not something I could prepare for through patience and observation alone. This required exactly the kind of instinct that could not be taught in a classroom, only earned through experience. We were divided into small teams and sent into different sections of a decommissioned station wing, modified to simulate various emergency conditions. My team included Threxus Van, a quiet, thoughtful Ithal cadet named Sella, and a Creosian engineering student named Nathan Cole, whose calm demeanor reminded me faintly of the volunteers I used to work alongside during flood season back home. The simulation began without warning. Lights along our section of corridor flickered, then dimmed to a dull emergency red, followed immediately by an alert tone warning of a hull breach 3 sections ahead of our position. According to our mission briefing, we were tasked with reaching an isolated group of simulated crew members, stabilizing a damaged life support system, and guiding everyone to safety before the simulated breach spread further into the station. "This is not real," Sella said quietly, glancing around at the flashing warning lights. "But it certainly feels real." "That is the point," I said. "If it feels real enough to make you think carefully, it is doing its job." Threxus moved to the front of our small group without hesitation, clearly falling back into the instincts of a species raised with strong emphasis on decisive leadership. I did not resent that. Confidence, used correctly, was valuable. The difference now was that his confidence no longer came paired with dismissiveness toward the rest of us. "Cadet Bell," he said, glancing back at me as we moved carefully down the darkened corridor. "You have experience with unpredictable environments that none of the rest of us have faced. What should we watch for first?" The question caught me slightly off guard. Weeks earlier, he would never have thought to ask me anything, let alone trust my judgment during a moment that actually mattered. "Structural instability first," I said, scanning the corridor ahead of us, out of habit rather than instruction. "Systems fail in patterns, not randomly. If the life support system is damaged, check for secondary failures nearby before assuming a single isolated problem. Back home, when one part of a system breaks under pressure, it almost never breaks alone." He nodded, adjusting our path slightly based on what I had said, taking my observation seriously rather than dismissing it. Sella and Nathan exchanged a brief glance, clearly noticing the shift in dynamic between us as well. We reached the simulated crew members several minutes later, 3 cadets playing the role of stranded personnel, one of them designated as injured according to the scenario parameters. The damaged life support terminal sat nearby, its access panel sparking intermittently, simulated warning symbols flashing across its cracked display. Nathan moved immediately toward the technical repair, his engineering training taking priority in that moment. Sayla began coordinating the evacuation route for the uninjured crew members, her calm, methodical approach well suited to managing group movement under stress. That left Threxus and me to handle the injured simulated crew member, whose scenario parameters indicated a leg injury preventing independent movement. I knelt beside the cadet, playing the injured role, quickly assessing the simulated wound according to the scenario's guidelines, my hands moving through the process with the same steady focus I remembered from real emergencies back home. Threxus knelt across from me, watching closely. "You have done this before," he said. "Not in training. In reality." "More times than I would like to count," I said, securing a simulated brace around the injured leg. "Floods do not wait for you to feel ready. Neither do storms, or falls, or any of the 100 ways nature back home reminds you that it does not care about your schedule." "How do you stay calm during something like that?" he asked, his voice quieter now, genuinely curious rather than testing me the way he once might have. I thought about the answer carefully before speaking, because it was a question worth answering honestly. "Panic does not solve problems," I said. "It only makes them louder. The first time I helped pull someone out of floodwater, I was terrified. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost lost my grip on the rope. My father told me something that day I have never forgotten. He said fear is allowed to exist inside you, but it is never allowed to make your decisions for you. After that, I learned to let the fear stay quiet in the background while my hands did what needed to be done." Threxus absorbed that in silence for a moment, then helped me lift the injured cadet carefully between us, following my lead on how to move without causing additional strain to the simulated injury. The corridor around us continued flashing warning signals as we made our way toward the evacuation point, Nathan successfully stabilizing the damaged life support terminal just before we reached the final checkpoint. Sayla, guiding the remaining crew members safely alongside us. The simulation concluded moments later, the emergency lighting fading back into the normal, steady glow of the training station. When the debrief began, Instructor Reed reviewed each team's performance carefully, highlighting strengths and weaknesses across every group. When he reached our team's results, his expression carried genuine approval. Team 4 completed the evacuation with the lowest simulated casualty risk of any group today, he said. Your coordination under pressure, particularly regarding structural assessment and injury stabilization, exceeded expectations. Several cadets from other teams glanced toward our group, clearly noting the shift in how instructors spoke about my contributions compared to just a few weeks earlier. Where once my presence had been treated as a curiosity requiring extra caution, it was now recognized as a genuine asset during moments of real pressure. After the debrief, as cadets filtered out of the simulation chamber, Threxus lingered behind, waiting until most of the room had emptied before speaking. "I have been thinking about something," he said. "When I challenged you to that match weeks ago, I believed I understood exactly what strength meant. Physical power, confidence, the ability to overwhelm an opponent quickly. I have spent my entire life training within that definition. And now?" I asked. "Now I understand there is a different kind of strength I never learned to recognize," he said. "The strength required to remain calm when everything around you is uncertain. The strength required to keep moving forward after enough hardship that most people would have given up entirely. Your planet did not simply survive extreme conditions, Cadet Bell. It built an entire population capable of remaining steady inside chaos most of us have never truly experienced." I considered his words carefully, surprised by how much thought he had clearly put into understanding something that had once seemed so foreign to him. "We do not think of it as anything special," I said. "It is just how we grew up. But I appreciate you taking the time to actually understand it, instead of simply assuming you already knew." He nodded, something settling into place between us that had not existed during those first difficult weeks. Not quite friendship yet, but the beginning of something built on genuine respect rather than assumption. Word of our team's performance during the emergency simulation spread through the academy much the way news of the sparring match once had, though this time the tone carried none of the disbelief or spectacle from before. Instead, cadets began approaching me with genuine questions, curious about how life on Earth had shaped the kind of steady judgment that had proven so valuable during a moment of real pressure. Even Dr. Nolan requested a follow-up conversation, eager to understand not just the physical resilience my species carried, but the psychological steadiness that seemed to accompany it. Resilience is not simply a matter of biology, she said during our meeting, reviewing data from the simulation, alongside my earlier physical assessments. It appears your species has developed a form of practical calm under pressure that goes beyond simple training. It seems deeply ingrained, almost instinctual. It is not instinct, I said. It is inheritance. Every generation on Earth passed down what they learned surviving the last disaster to the next generation facing a new one. Eventually, that knowledge becomes part of who you are, before you even realize you are carrying it. She nodded slowly, writing something down, though this time her expression held none of the earlier disbelief from our first meeting. It held something closer to quiet admiration. The Academy's classification files regarding Earth were formally updated the following week, no longer listing my planet simply as an extreme hazard environment unsuitable for standard development. The new designation, still cautious in its wording, acknowledged something the original report had entirely missed. Earth was dangerous, yes, but it was also, in its own harsh and demanding way, an extraordinary teacher. I did not need the official records to tell me that. I had known it my entire life, but watching the galaxy slowly begin to understand what my planet had quietly taught its people for thousands of years felt like something worth remembering, long after the mockery of that very first day at the Academy had faded into something closer to distant memory. 6 weeks after the emergency simulation, the Academy announced its final assessment for our training cycle, a large-scale mission exercise designed to combine everything we had learned across every discipline into a single extended scenario. Unlike previous exercises, this one would stretch across 3 full days, testing not only our individual skills, but our ability to function as a cohesive team under sustained pressure. When the team assignments were posted, I found my name listed alongside Threxus Van, Sella, and Nathan Cole, the same group that had worked together during the earlier simulation. Instructor Reed explained that team continuity had been prioritized this time, allowing established groups to build on the trust they had already developed, rather than starting fresh with unfamiliar teammates. "You 4 performed exceptionally well together," he said during our final briefing before the exercise began. "The coalition values consistency in high-pressure environments. Trust between teammates is not something that develops overnight, and it is rarely wasted once it has been earned." The mission scenario placed us aboard a simulated transport vessel, experiencing a cascading series of technical failures, while navigating what the exercise parameters described as a hazardous debris field. Our objective was straightforward in concept, but demanding in execution: keep the vessel operational, protect the simulated crew, and safely reach the designated rendezvous point before our simulated resources ran out. Over the following 3 days, our team faced one complication after another, each requiring a different combination of skills. Nathan spent long hours diagnosing and repairing simulated system failures, his engineering expertise proving invaluable time and again. Sella managed communication with the simulated crew, keeping morale steady, even as conditions grew increasingly difficult within the scenario. Threxus coordinated our overall strategy, his natural leadership abilities sharpened by weeks of learning to listen more carefully to the rest of us before making decisions. My role, I found, had shifted subtly since that very first sparring match. I was no longer simply the Deathworld girl tolerated at the edges of the group. I had become the one others turned to whenever a situation grew unpredictable enough that structured training alone could not provide clear answers. During the second night of the exercise, our simulated vessel encountered an unexpected complication not included in the standard scenario parameters, a randomized element the instructors had built into the exercise specifically to test our adaptability. A sudden simulated pressure drop in one section of the vessel forced an immediate decision about how to redistribute our limited resources without fully understanding the cause. "We do not have enough information to make a fully informed decision," Sella said, studying the readings with visible concern. "If we act too quickly and misjudge the cause, we risk making the situation worse. If we wait too long to gather more information, we risk losing the section entirely," Nathan added. Threxus looked toward me, the same way he had during our earlier emergency simulation weeks before. "Cadet Bell, what would you do?" I studied the readings carefully, thinking not about the abstract technical data alone, but about the deeper pattern beneath it, the same way I might have once studied a changing sky, before deciding whether to bring the livestock in early or risk losing them to an approaching storm. We do not have perfect information, I said. We are not going to get it in time to matter, but waiting is also a decision, and right now, it is the more dangerous one. Redistribute resources towards stabilizing the pressure drop first. If we are wrong, we adjust. If we are right, we prevent this from becoming something worse. Threxus did not hesitate. Do it, he said, trusting my judgment without further debate. The decision proved correct. The pressure stabilized, the simulated crisis resolved, before it could cascade into a larger failure, and our team moved forward, through the remainder of the exercise, with renewed confidence in each other's judgment. By the time the exercise concluded on the third day, our team had successfully guided the simulated vessel through every complication the instructors had designed, arriving at the rendezvous point with minimal simulated losses and full crew survival. When the final results were posted, our team ranked among the highest performing groups in the entire training cycle. During the closing ceremony that followed, Instructor Reed addressed the assembled cadets, reflecting on the training cycle as a whole. Several weeks ago, he said, many of you entered this academy carrying assumptions about which species would prove strongest, which would struggle, and which advantages truly mattered in difficult situations. I hope this training cycle has taught you something valuable about how easily assumptions can mislead even well-trained minds. His eyes found mine briefly across the room before continuing. True strength is rarely loud. It is rarely obvious at first glance. Sometimes, the greatest strength comes from those who have spent their entire lives quietly enduring conditions the rest of us can barely imagine, without ever once expecting recognition for it. After the ceremony ended, Threxus found me near the edge of the training hall, the noise of celebrating cadets fading into background as we stood together for a quiet moment. I owe you something more than an apology, he said. When I first challenged you, I wanted to prove something about my own strength by diminishing yours. Instead, you taught me something about strength I never expected to learn. You do not owe me anything, I said, but I appreciate you saying it. I have been thinking about your planet's history, he continued, about how every generation faced hardship most worlds in the coalition have never known, and somehow still managed to build something worth protecting. I understand now why the coalition calls it a death world. I also understand why that word should never have been treated as an insult. I smiled, thinking about my grandmother, my father, and everyone back home who had never once considered themselves extraordinary, simply because surviving hardship was the only life they had ever known. On Earth, I said, we do not measure strength by how loudly someone announces it. We measure it by who is still standing when everything else has fallen. That is a lesson every single person from my planet carries with them, whether they ever leave home or not. Threxus nodded slowly, extending his hand toward me, the same gesture I had once offered him on the training platform weeks earlier, the gesture he had been too proud to accept back then. This time, he meant it. I took his hand, and for the first time since arriving at that academy, I felt something I had not expected to feel so far from home. Not pity disguised as kindness, not curiosity disguised as tolerance. Simple, honest respect, earned the hard way, exactly the way it had always been earned back on the only planet stubborn enough to raise someone like me. He mocked the Deathworld girl once, believing weakness where strength quietly waited instead. After that, he never called me Deathworld girl again. He simply called me by my name,